Okay, I want you to close your eyes for a second and just imagine a specific moment.
Hmm.
You have just spent 12 hours huddled somewhere safe while a Category 5 hurricane, they call it Hurricane Melissa, tore the world apart outside. The sound, that locomotive roar?
The sound that rattles your teeth.
Exactly. And then suddenly it stops. The wind dies down. The rain slows. And you step outside into this gray light.
It's that eerie, heavy silence. You can almost feel the pressure drop.
You do, but then you realize the silence it's bigger than just the weather. You reach for your phone, maybe to text family or check the news.
And there's nothing.
Dead air, no bars, no internet. You flip a light switch just out of habit. Nothing. The refrigerator isn't humming. The streetlights are dark. It's not just that the storm passed. It's that the entire infrastructure of your life has just vanished.
That's the digital blackout.
Yeah.
And honestly, in 2026, that silence is almost more terrifying than the wind. It's that moment you realize you are completely, utterly on your own.
And that is exactly where we're starting our deep dive today. We're looking at a fascinating stack of documents about the aftermath of Hurricane Melissa in Jamaica. But we're not here to talk about wind speeds. No, we're talking about what happens after the noise stops. We're looking at how a country rebuilds when the whole grid has been wiped clean.
The core insight from the research, and this is specifically from reports around the new National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority, or NRA, is just, well, it's incredibly profound.
What is it?
The argument is that a storm doesn't just damage a country. It reveals it.
It's like an X-ray. Right.
Exactly. A brutal X-ray. It strips away the whole veneer of business as usual. When the sun is shining, you assume your systems are working.
You assume the government agencies are coordinated, the power grid is solid.
But the storm tests all of those assumptions. And in Jamaica's case, what it revealed was that the systems everyone thought were solid were actually incredibly brittle.
So, today we're exploring the birth of NARA and this idea of deliberate urgency. We're going to look at why rushing to fix things might actually be the worst thing you can do.
And how Jamaica is trying to create a blueprint for the rest of us on how to survive in this climate era.
Yeah.
It's a masterclass in the difference between managing an emergency and rebuilding a nation.
And those are two very different things.
Two very different sports.
Let's go back to that silence. The source material from Jamaica Homes talks about how the darkness after Melissa wasn't just, no electricity. They call it the absence of connectivity.
And that's a critical distinction. Usually when we see disaster footage on the news, we're looking for physical damage.
Right, roofs gone, roads washed out.
And of course that happened. But the sources argue the real systemic shock, the thing that almost broke the state, was the collapse of coordination.
Because without the internet, without cell service, the brain can't talk to the body.
Precisely. We've built these governance systems that rely entirely on real-time data. The ministries in Kingston, they need emails, digital reports to know what's happening out in the rural parishes.
So when the towers went down,
The government was effectively blinded.
which leads to this really interesting dynamic that the reports mention. When the central government stalled because it was blind, who stepped up?
The communities,
Yeah.
the local networks, it was, the churches, the neighborhood associations, local NGOs, they moved immediately because they didn't need a fiber optic cable to see that their neighbor's house was gone.
They were just there.
They were there.
And that's heartwarming, right? It proves the human spirit is resilient. But if you put your systems analyst hat on, it's actually a huge red flag.
It is. It's a systemic failure. It means the state's capacity didn't reach the edge of the network. The big machine just broke. And this leads to what I think is the most provocative argument in this whole file.
What's that?
Returning to normal is a trap.
I highlighted that 3 times. Because usually, after any crisis, the rallying cry is always, let's get back to normal. Why is that wrong here?
Because normal was the problem.
Mm.
If normal means a centralized power grid that fails in a strong wind, or government ministries that operate in their own silos,
And can't share resources.
then going back to normal just sets you up for the exact same collapse next time.
It's like fixing a flat tire with duct tape and then trying to drive across the country.
Exactly. And the source material really goes after these ministerial silos. In normal times, sure, the Department of Roadworks doesn't need to talk to the Department of Housing every single hour, but reconstruction is different.
It's all connected.
Totally. You can't build new housing if the road isn't fixed, and you can't power it if the energy grid isn't integrated.
Yeah.
The normal bureaucracy just proved incapable of that.
So this is the origin story of NARA, but I have to play devil's advocate for a second. Jamaica already has disaster people. They've got ODPEM, the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management. So why create a whole new alphabet soup agency? Isn't that just adding more bureaucracy?
It's the obvious question, and a lot of critics raised it. But the distinction the source draws is vital. Think of ODPM as the ambulance.
Okay, the ambulance.
Their job is speed, sirens, triage, stopping the bleeding, getting people to shelters. They're indispensable. But NERA is the architect you hire to redesign the foundation of the house so you don't fall through the floor again.
So you can't ask the paramedic to also be the architect.
You can't. It's a bandwidth issue
Yeah.
and a skill set issue. Rebuilding a nation involves things like land use zoning, complex financial sequencing, long-term climate adaptation. You can't ask the people running emergency shelters, who are exhausted and traumatized, to also redesign the national telecom strategy for 2050.
So NARA exists to handle the long game while ODPM handles the now game.
That's it. NARA was born from the admission that the existing government architecture just couldn't carry the weight of reconstruction. It's a specialized tool.
But that creates this huge tension. I mean, imagine you're a citizen, your roof is gone, you're in a shelter, and you hear about this new agency, NARA, and they're talking about long-term planning. You'd be furious.
Oh, absolutely. You want action now.
You want a hammer and nails.
And that is the trap of speed.
The trap of speed. The source material has this fantastic line. Haste has a habit of hardening mistakes.
It's so profound, isn't it? The political pressure after a storm is just immense. Everyone wants to see excavators moving dirt.
They want visible progress.
But the analysis here is crucial. If you rush to rebuild a neighborhood in the exact same flood-prone area with the same weak materials, just so you can cut a ribbon for the evening news, you have failed.
You've just locked that community into vulnerability for the next generation.
Exactly. You've hardened the mistake.
Which brings us to a connection I really didn't see coming. The documents reference Dean Jones, the founder of Jamaica Homes, and he draws this parallel between the hurricane recovery and the 2017 Westminster terrorist attack in the UK.
I know, it really stalks you in your tracks. On the surface, a Caribbean hurricane and a London terror attack, they seem like totally different worlds.
Completely different. One is weather, the other is violence.
But look at the psychology of the aftermath. That's what Dean Jones focuses on. He worked on national security programs after Westminster, and he says the fog of war is identical.
Wow, so...
A single catastrophic event just rips through daily life. Panic sets in, systems go down, rumors start flying, and the pressure on leadership to do something, anything, is just overwhelming.
That urge to just start running without knowing where you're going.
Jones calls it running without composition. The lesson from Westminster that he says applies to Jamaica is that in those moments, true leadership isn't frantic activity. It's about establishing order and discipline first.
Resisting the urge to just start nailing boards together before you even have a blueprint.
Now, this is where we get to the core philosophy of NARA, deliberate urgency.
It sounds like a contradiction, doesn't it?
It does. How can you be deliberate, which implies being careful and urgent at the same time?
Right.
Well, urgency means you don't waste a single second. Deliberate means you don't waste a single movement. It means taking the 2 weeks to get the engineering specs right for a solar microgrid so it doesn't blow off the roof, instead of installing a cheap system today just to say you did something.
It's about clarity and capability, not just visible motion.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's get specific. We've all heard the slogan, Build Back Better. I feel like politicians say that every time a tree branch falls. But the source material is trying to, de-slogan that phrase. What does this deliberate urgency actually look like on the ground?
It requires strict engineering discipline. The report gets very specific. Let's start with connectivity, since that's where we started.
Okay.
The storm proved that relying on terrestrial lines, cables on poles, is a single point of failure. So building back better means redundancy. It means satellite backups are absolutely non-negotiable.
So not just for, watching movies, but for the actual machinery of the state.
For everything critical. Hospitals, emergency centers, police stations, they must have reliable satellite connectivity, things like Starlink or similar systems that completely bypass the local grid.
If the poles snap, the data must still flow.
You cannot lose patient records or supply chain data just because a tree fell on a wire. It's that simple.
And then there's power. I saw a lot about solar, but it seemed more nuanced than just put panels everywhere.
It is. The argument is that solar can't be an experiment or a green bonus anymore. It has to be the baseline. But specifically, integrated storage. A shelter shouldn't need a diesel generator to keep the lights on.
The building itself should be a power plant.
Exactly. And treating telecommunications as essential infrastructure, That seemed like a big legal shift.
Huge. Historically, telecoms are seen as commercial services, private companies selling you a product.
But the argument here is that in 2026, connectivity is national security. It needs to be regulated, protected, and hardened with the same rigor we apply to our water supply.
But the biggest shift described isn't just the wires or the panels, it's the topology, the actual shape of the grid, decentralization.
This is the key to the whole thing. During Melissa, the centralized model failed. The brain in the capital couldn't talk to the limbs in the parishes.
So how do you fix that?
You stop building a dumb body that needs a brain to move. You build distributed intelligence. You give the limbs their own little brains.
What does that mean in practice?
It means empowering local response. A community center in a rural parish needs its own power generation, its own water filtration, and its own satellite communications. So if the main line to Kingston is cut, that parish can still function. It can survive.
So you're creating a mesh network instead of a hub and spoke.
That's the perfect analogy. If one node goes down, the rest of the network stays up. Local autonomy within a national framework.
That makes perfect sense technically, but let's be real, that sounds like a nightmare to manage. If everyone is autonomous, how do you keep control? How do you stop chaos?
And that brings us to the human element. And honestly, this is the part of the deep dive that surprised me the most. You expect engineering specs and legal frameworks, but the source spends so much time talking about mindset.
It says NARA's success won't come from its legislation, but from its people.
Right. You can give an agency all the emergency powers in the world, and NARA has them, but if the people running it are arrogant or just disconnected, it will fail. The source actually lists humility as a primary professional skill.
Humility, not the first trait you think of for a government authority. Usually it's bureaucracy.
Or ego. But think about the context. You're walking into communities that are traumatized, people have lost everything, they are raw. If NARA just bulldozes in with a we know best attitude, the locals will reject them.
So it's not about commanding, it's about collaborating.
The source has this amazing phrase. It describes reconstruction as an act of care executed with authority.
Care executed with authority. That's a really delicate balance.
It is. It means listening to the emotional reality of the victims, but still having the professional discipline to make the hard technical choices. It's competence combined with compassion.
But here's the risk, and we have to talk about it. NARA is designed to bypass bureaucracy to move fast. But when you strip away checks and balances for speed, don't you open the door for corruption? Or at least waste?
It's a massive risk, and the source acknowledges it head on. That's why the governance piece is called Designing Accountability at Speed.
What does that even look like? Because accountability usually means some 3-year audit that happens way too late to matter.
Exactly. That's the old model. Accountability at speed means real-time monitoring. It means if a contractor isn't delivering, you don't file a complaint that gets read next year, you cut them loose today. It requires a certain ruthlessness about outcomes.
So you monitor funds honestly and evaluate without sentiment.
You have to be compassionate with the people, the victims, but absolutely ruthless with the process and the contractors.
It's a high-wire act.
It requires a very specific type of leader. Someone who isn't looking for votes and isn't looking to be popular. They just want the job done right.
Let's pivot to the future to wrap this up. Because the underlying theme here is that Hurricane Melissa wasn't some freak accident. It's a preview.
This brings us to the concept of fear. Usually in leadership, we try to suppress fear. We say, don't panic, everything's under control.
Right.
But the source has a very different take. Fear, properly understood, is not paralysis. It is information.
I love that. Fear is data.
It is. Jamaica is in a seismic zone. It's in the hurricane belt. The climate is intensifying. That fear you feel when the wind starts to howl, that isn't weakness. That's your survival instinct telling you that your current shelter isn't good enough.
So instead of trying to be brave and ignore it, you use that fear to drive the engineering decisions.
Exactly. Preparedness means being willing to stare directly at the nightmare. NARA's job is to imagine the worst-case scenarios, collapsed buildings, contaminated water, total grid failure, and plan for them before they happen.
You have to be willing to be uncomfortable now so you can be safe later.
It reminds me of that section on the quiet work. The most important work NARA does will be the quiet work of rebuilding a country.
Right, the idea that the real victory isn't the big ribbon-cutting ceremony.
No, the real work is boring. It's people in windowless rooms looking at geological surveys. It's coding the failover protocols for satellite uplinks. It's not sexy. It doesn't get you likes on social media.
But that quiet work is the difference between life and death when the next Cat 5 hits.
Precisely. It's where expertise matters more than noise. And in a world that loves noise, valuing that silence, the silence of focus, not the silence of failure, is a radical act.
So let's pull all this together. We've looked at the failure of the old normal, the trap of rushing, the technical shift to decentralization, and this need for deliberate urgency. What does this all mean for you, the listener, whether you're in Jamaica or thousands of miles away?
I think the big takeaway is that NARA represents a shift in how we view the state itself. It's an admission that 20th century bureaucracy simply cannot solve 21st century climate disasters.
A static, siloed government can't fight a dynamic, chaotic climate.
Just can't.
The source ends with a Jamaican saying that I think just perfectly anchors this whole discussion. We little, but we telewa.
We are small, but we are strong. Or mighty.
And the source is careful to point out this isn't just, national pride on a bumper sticker.
No, it's a strategic definition of strength. Strength isn't about size. Jamaica's a tiny island. Strength is about agility, resolve, and organization. Small countries can survive massive shocks if they're smarter and faster than the storm.
They survive by having the courage to tear down that broken normal and build something that actually works.
That's the Talawa part. The might comes from the resilience, not the landmass.
That brings us to the end of this deep dive into Jamaica's blueprint for reconstruction. It's a story about a hurricane, but it's really a masterclass in change management.
And leadership. It's about facing reality, no matter how harsh.
So here's a final thought for you to carry with you. We talked about how normal was the trap that made the system so fragile. So look at your own life or your own organization. After a crisis, we all rush to get back to the way things were.
The status quo.
But ask yourself, where are you frantically trying to return to normal when maybe you should be using the silence to build something entirely different?
That's the hard question.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.
Stay safe out there.
See you next time.